I stand in the fields of Ivory Coast holding a cocoa pod and I say this isn't just a bean. It's our power, our pride, our future. Africa will grow it, make it, and taste it because we are now. In a small village in Ivory Coast, surrounded by tall cocoa trees and red dirt, a mother asked her son, "Do you think chocolate tastes like Thebians we dry?" The boy didn't know, neither did his mother. They worked hard growing cocoa, but they had never tasted chocolate. Their hands touched millions of cocoa beans, but the chocolate was always sent far away. This is a story about how that is changing. It's about a man named Ibrahim Traoré, who came to Ivory Coast with a big idea. He wants Africa to keep the value of its cocoa. This is not just about chocolate. It's about pride, power, and a new future for Africa. The world loves chocolate. Every year, people spend over $130 billion on it. But the farmers in Ivory Coast and Ghana who grow most of the world's cocoa is yet very little money. They earn less than $2 a day. This is not fair. It's part of a system that takes cocoa beans from Africa and makes money for others in places like Europe and America. If Ivory Coast grows more cocoa than any other country, but it doesn't decide thepris. People in cities like New York and London set the price and African farmers have no say. This system has kept Africa poor while others get rich, but now, something is changing. Ibrahim Traoré, a leader known for standing up for his people, came to Ivory Coast. Hadn't come with weapons or to talk about gold or uranium. He came to talk about cocoa. He walked through village fields, picked up a cocoa pod and said, "This is not just a bean. It's our story and we will take it back." His words spread quickly. Some thought it was just talk. Others felt it was something bigger, a chance to change how the world sees Africa's cocoa. For many years, Ivory Coast has grown cocoa and sent it to Europe. The beans leave the country raw and Europe turns them into chocolate. They put the chocolate in shiny packages and sell it for a lot of money. Sometimes they sell it back to Africa at high prices. The farmers who grow the cocoa don't get much of that money. They work hard carrying heavy baskets of beans, but they stay poor. Many have never even tasted chocolate. This is not an accident. It's how the system works. The price of cocoa is decided in faraway places, not in the villages where it's grown. Farmers in Ivory Coast have no power over what their beans are worth. They sell Thebians to middlemen who sell them to exporters who send them to Europe. By the time the beans become chocolate, Thevalu belongs to someone else. This system has been in place for a long time and it keeps Africa from growing strong, even worse. When Africans try to make their own chocolate, they face problems. People in Europe say African chocolate tea is good enough. They say it doesn't meet their standards. But who makes these standards? Not the farmers, not people who know the land. The rules are made by others and they make it hard for Africans to succeed. This is what Ibrahim Traoré wants to change. He believes Africa can make its own chocolate and keep the value for itself. When Ibrahim Traoré came to Abidjan, a big city in Ivory Coast, he brought a new idea. He didn't just want to grow cocoa beans and send them away. He wanted to build factories in Ivory Coast to make chocolate. He wanted Africans to roast the beans, grind them, and wrap the chocolate themselves. He wanted the world to see that Africa can make something great. This wasn't just about making chocolate. It was about taking back control. Traoré walked through the cocoa fields like he belonged there. He talked to farmers, young people, and elders. He listened to their stories. He saw how hard they worked and how little he got in return. He told them, "We grow the cocoa. We should decide what he's worth. We should taste what we make." His words gave people hope. They started to believe that they could do more than just grow beans. Behind Traoré, people ready to help. There were engineers who knew how to build machines. There were farmers who understood cocoa better than anyone. There were young people who wanted to learn how to make chocolate. Together they started small. They didn't ask for money from other countries. They didn't wait for permission. They began building factories and cooperatives, groups where people worked together to share the work and the profits. In a village Caladoup, something special began. Dupe is a small place with no streetlights or paved roads, but it's surrounded by cocoa trees. A group of 11 women and 4 men decided to try something new. They asked, if others can make Coca-Cola from our beans, why can't we? They didn't have a factory or a lot of money, but they had courage. They borrowed a grinder from a rice mill and used clay ovens to roast their cocoa beans. They wrapped their chocolate in banana leaves. The first chocolate bars they made were not perfect. They were raw and sometimes bitter, but they were proud because the chocolate weighs theirs. They sold their first bars at a local market for 600 CFA francs, which is about $1. One woman cried when Simeone bought her chocolate. She said, I used to bend over to sell beans. Now people stand to buy my chocolate. That meant changed everything. The people of Dupe realized they could do more than grow cocoa. They could create something valuable. Word about Dupe's chocolate spread fast. Other villages wanted to learn how to make chocolate too. Students from the city came to help. A young man from Abidjan made a logo for Coca-Cola bars. They gave the bars Anam in Zora, which means dignity in Thelical language. The bars were labeled in 3 languages. Dupe's language, French, and English. Slowly, Coca-Cola started to feel like something bigger than just a product. It felt like pride. The chocolate from Dupe started to change how people thought. For a long time, people in Ivory Coast didn't believe their own country could make good chocolate. They were used to seeing foreign chocolate in shiny packages. But when they tasted the bars from Dupe, they were surprised. A boy bought a bar for his mother. A teacher shared it with her students. A wedding used Coca-Cola instead of expensive imported candy. People began to see that their own land could make something special. The cooperative in Dupe made 4 kinds of chocolate. Classic dark roasted plantain, baobab fruit, and a spicy one called Samkara spice after a famous African leader who said, he who feeds you controls you. These flavors were new and exciting. They weren't like Coca-Cola from Europe. They were African. Made with local ingredients and pride. People started buying more and the chocolate appeared in stores in cities like Abidjan and Yamoussoukro. But not everyone was happy. The big chocolate companies in Europe started to notice. They didn't like that Ivory Coast was making its own chocolate. They were used to buying cheap cocoa bean sand, making all the money themselves. When they heard about Dupe's success, they tried to stop it. They said Coca-Cola wasn't good enough. They said it might not be safe. They made ether for African chocolate to reach other countries. But the people of Dupe didn't give up. They had tasted something more powerful than chocolate. They had tasted ownership. The European chocolate companies didn't fight with weapons. They fought with rules and money. They offered lower prices for Ivory Coast's cocoa beans. They made ether to export chocolate by adding new inspections. They sent people to help farmers, but their advice was always same. Keep selling raw beans, not chocolate. This was their way of keeping control. They didn't want Africa to make its own chocolate because that would mean less money for them. But Ibrahim Traoré and the people of Ivory Coast were ready to fight back, not with anger, but with action. Trey called a meeting under a cocoa tree, not in Afansi Hotel. He listened to the farmers. A grandmother asked, why are they afraid of our chocolate? A young girl said, maybe because it's better. Troll smiled and said, this is how we take back our power. Not with loud words, but with small steps. Those steps were the factories, the cooperatives, and the pride of making something themselves. The people of Dupe kept going. They sold more chocolate, and other villages joined them. They didn't need Europe's approval anymore. They were making chocolate for Africans by Africans. ACAF and Ghana wanted to sell their chocolate. An airline asked for samples to serve on flights. For the first time, African chocolate was traveling fueled, not as raw beans, but as finished edbers. This was a big change, and it scared the big companies in Europe. The Coca-Cola revolution started in one village. But it didn't stay there. Other villages in Ivory Coast began making their own chocolate. They learned from Dupe and started their own cooperatives. In Ghana, young people built factories that used solar power to roast cocoa beans. In Nigeria, chocolate makers worked with fashion brands to create gift boxes. In Senegal, people started tours to show visitors where the cocoa came from. The revolution was spreading across Africa. Ibrahim Traoré saw this and wanted to make it stronger. Heckled a big meeting in Oussoukou, the capital of Ivory Coast. Leaders from Ghana, Togo, and Burkina Faso came. They made a bold promise. No cocoa bean will leave Africa without being turned into something valuable by African hands. This was a big moment. It meant Africa was ready to take control of its cocoa, not just grow it for others. To make this happen, they started new projects. They built 4 new chocolatero cooperatives in different parts of West Africa. They created a center in Baya, Asidi in Ivory Coast, where scientists could study how to make better chocolate. They also made an online store so people around the world could buy African chocolate directly. These steps showed that Africa was serious about owning its cocoa and its future. The big chocolate companies in Europe didn't like these changes. They tried to make things harder for African chocolate makers. They said African chocolate didn't meet their rules. They stopped some shipments at ports saying they needed extra checks. They offered money to help small farmers, but only if they agreed to keep selling raw beans. These were all ways to keep Africa farm growing strong. But the people of Ivory Coast and other African countries didn't stop. They had tasted their own chocolate and they knew it was good. They didn't need Europe to tell them what was valuable. They kept building factories and making chocolate. They worked together, sharing ideas and helping each other. The revolution wasn't just about chocolate anymore. It was about believing in themselves. In Ghana, young people used technology to track their cocoa from the farm to the store. In Nigeria, chocolate became part of fancy gift boxes. In Senegal, tourists came to see where the chocolate was made. Across Africa, people were starting to see that they could create something great. They didn't need to send their cocoa away. They could keep it and make it their own. Ibrahim Traoré had another big idea. He wanted to protect African farmers from the ups and downs of the cocoa market. He proposed a special fund called the Pan-African Cocoa Reserve Fund. This fund would use money from African countries to make sure farmers got fair prices for their cocoa. It would also help build more factories and train more people to make chocolate. Traoré said, "We grow cocoa. We should decide its value. We will no longer follow rules made by others." This idea made some people nervous. The big chocolate companies and markets in Europe didn't like it. They were used to controlling the price of cocoa. When Africa started to take control, they got scared. The cocoa market in London went down and some people blamed it on problems in Africa, but the real problem was that Africa was becoming independent. By 2027, African chocolate was being sold in stores in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa. It wasn't just in small markets anymore. It was in big supermarkets. People were proud to buy chocolate made in Africa. Bloggers wrote about it and airlines served it on planes. The world was starting to notice that Africa could make something great. The chocolate revolution wasn't just about cocoa. It made people ask big questions. What else was Africa giving away? Cotton was sent away raw and came back as expensive flies. Coffee was roasted in other countries and sold back for more money. Gold was mined in Africa, but stored in European banks. Even music and culture were taken and sold by others. The chocolate revolution showed Africans that they could take control of all these things. In Burkina Faso, a new school course taught students how to turn raw materials into finished products. In Ivory Coast, high school started teaching about chocolate making alongside science. In Ghana, new laws made it easier to sell finished products like chocolate instead of raw beans. In Senegal, people worked to protect traditional flavors so others couldn't steal them. These changes showed that Africa was ready to create, not just grow. Ibrahim Traoré spoke at a big meeting in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. He said they were afraid of gold. Now they're afraid of our chocolate? What happens when we realize we've always had the power? His words made people stand up, not just to clap, but because they felt something had changed. Cocoa wasn't just a crop anymore. It was a symbol of Africa's strength. Across Africa, murals appeared on walls. They showed women breaking cocoa pods, children eating chocolate with smiles, and factories full of workers. In one village, someone painted words, No more exports without excellence. This meant Africa would no longer send away its raw materials. It would make something great and keep the value for itself. The revolution wasn't just one big moment, it was many small steps. Cooperatives became brands. Young people stopped leaving Africa and started building factories. People from other countries came back to invest in their home. This wasn't just a chocolate anymore. It was about controlling Africa's future. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré shows that change is possible. It started in one village, but it spread to a whole continent. It started with cocoa, but it grew to include cotton, coffee, gold, and more. It started with a question, why can't we make our own chocolate? And it ended with a new belief. Africa is now. This story needs you. Every change needs someone to share it. You may not grow cocoa or make chocolate, but you can tell others about this revolution. Share this story with your friends. Tell them about Dupe and the people who dared to dream. If you believe Africa should control what it grows, leave a comment with one word, rising. If you think Africa is ready to create its own future, say from Bean's Top Hour. The chocolate revolution is not just about cocoa. It's about pride, power, a new way of thinking. It's about a continent that is ready to taste what it grows and keep what it creates. One village, one factory, one bar of chocolate at a time. Africa is building a new future.